recording.
Okay, so welcome everybody to the Active Teaching Lab on assessment strategies. These are remote support active teaching labs. If you've been to a face-to-face active teaching lab that we've had over the last 5 years now, this is an attempt to do the same sort of thing in this virtual space. So it's a little bit different though. We don't give you bagels, we don't give you coffee. Sorry, you have to supply your own. I have mine, my coffee, and I had a bagel earlier today. And it was very nice. But we still want to try to get as much conversation, and we want to be as responsive as we can be to the questions that you are facing and the challenges that you're facing in this today's topic, the theme of assessment strategies. So questions like, what alternatives are there for traditional in-person exams? How can we encourage honest effort on remote assessment? How can we ensure students understand the assessment goals? How can we streamline and provide clear feedback on qualitative work? And other questions like that that you might have. So let's see, can I get a show of hands? Wait, am I going to do this, Karen, or are you about Blackboard
No,
Collaborate?
go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
All right, raise your hand if you are comfortable and have been using Blackboard Collaborate. Very good. We've got a lot of folks, got a couple of people who are not super comfortable. So let's have Karen, if you can go through those beginning slides.
Sure. Sounds like most of you are familiar, but so I'll just point out a few key things that you may be aware of or not aware of. So bear with me if you already know all of this. But the key thing is, I can also use my annotation tools here. I got a little hand here that I can use to point. We'll try out some of these annotation tools in a minute. Here, if you have problems, you can close and open this purple, purple arrow here. And if you just want to see the slides, you can click on that. And if you don't get to see what's over here, if you're missing all that, that means you need to open that up. So you can see here, this is where you're all chatting. Obviously, you know what to do there. This is where you can see participants. And for example, where John just had everyone raise their hand, if you click on that participant one, you'll be able to see when people raise their hands. Another cool thing about that, there's a lot of other little features, such as some emoticons and things like that, that you can type in the chat. So when you're happy or sad. And also here on the participant one, you can see what people put in. So sometimes I go back and forth between the participant panel and the chat because you can see some of the different things that people put on there. So for example, if you click on it's the next slide here, if you click on your people icon here, if you click on that, you'll see you have different options of saying that you agree or disagree or go too slow or Cliff just changed his to happy face, thank you. So you can make different changes there on your profile that shows up in the people area. And that helps the moderators kind of see what's going on. Oh, good, Dan too. So you guys are figuring that out. Cliff, did you have a question? You're just practicing raising your hand.
Actually, just wanted to point out this was new to me, but the little emoticon thing that I just turned on, my smiley face, it times out. It times out after a minute.
Right, it doesn't stay long. Yes, it doesn't stay very long. That was one thing too, because I'm going to use it for an activity in a session this afternoon. So you have to look really quickly, otherwise it goes away. That's a very good point. And also when you're doing polling and things like that, you can see what answers are there in the polling, but it doesn't stay very long. Karen, did you have a comment on that?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that if you want to direct your students to use that, it might be helpful to pull that attendee panel out into the active screen, because then you get at the top a kind of quick report and you can see everybody sitting there and who's saying what, who's responding in what way. So that's just a kind of added element to using that I would suggest.
Yep.
As a facilitator, as a moderator.
Right, yeah, I don't know if participants can do that. I have no, truth be told, I don't know. I just know moderators can.
Yeah, so that is helpful. So you can see all of that happening at the same time. So everyone knows here not to leave their audio enabled, except for Cliff or Rooney. There you go. Thank you, Cliff. So it's good to turn off your audio so we don't hear the background. And all of you know how to raise your hand. We obviously did that feature here. And one of the funny things is, one of the most things that people tend to do wrong is forget to put on their microphone, believe it or not, when you're talking. Right, John? Where you can just talk and just realize that nobody's hearing you. So sometimes that's the thing that happens. He's laughing. Happens
I do that
most
all
often.
the time.
Yes, we know, John, but we love you anyway. But so that's really the features. It's pretty easy to use. We're going to use some of those annotation tools that you see here in just a minute. This is the pointer tool. I use this a lot because when people post things on a whiteboard or if they post it on a slide, which we're going to do in a minute, sometimes they type over each other, and as the moderator, I can move people around. And this is what I'm using right now, the pointer tool. And then there's a pencil tool where you can draw. And also I use this where I want a circle, or this turns into a circle or a square. And then the T tool where you can type, and this where you can erase. But you have to be very careful. If you click the erase, it erases everything. If you just click on one item and click delete, then it just deletes one thing. So I'm going to turn this over to John, and then we'll try out those annotation tools in just a minute.
All right. I'm talking about all right, so here's the sort of the agenda that we're going to be following. In many ways, this follows the face-to-face active teaching labs as well. One of the things that's a little bit different is we have five top tips now, or top 5 tips. I guess we've changed that since yesterday. It was top 5 takeaways, but then we're like, well, wait a second, we're giving this at the very beginning, so let's make them tips at the beginning and takeaways afterwards, so we can have takeaways in our recaps that people can review later on. So we've got 5 things that we're going to say. Here's what we think are our top 5 tips. And they are current top 5 tips. They are our opinions of current top 5 tips. They may or may not be the top 5 tips for you. And tomorrow we might have one that supersedes number 1. And now we've got a different set of top 5. These are the ones we thought of from last night, yesterday afternoon. We're going to ask you to think about what are your concerns and to share those with us. We want these labs to be as responsive as possible. So please share any questions that you have, and we will work our hardest to try to address those to your satisfaction, which is number 3. We'll try to address those needs. We have on the activity sheet, which we'll go over in just a little bit, a set of resources as well, both some quick how-tos for people who are coming in with zero knowledge at all, with a little bit of knowledge, and with some of you are advanced in this topic. And so we've got some advanced things for you to try out because you're already ahead of the game, but maybe you want to get pushed a little bit farther. We hope that that'll push you a little bit farther. The last half hour of our session from 11 to 11:30, we will spend on questions. Not probably for everybody, but if you have a burning question and we didn't get around to it in the first hour, stick around there and we will do our darndest to see you through much more personally, I guess, to figure out what those questions are. Okay? Go ahead,
Okay,
Karen.
great. Now we get a chance to try out the annotation tool. So if you click like I show here, there's this T tool at the very top. If you can click on that and type, what are your concerns you have about remote assessment? So I know we have a lot of experts on the line here too, so feel free to share concerns that maybe you heard from other instructors as well. Yep, that's a big one. And another thing that you can do with this, if you pull on the corners of something that was posted, not that I want to make that one bigger probably, but but you can just pull on it and then you can see it a little bit larger. So integrity. In fact, I'm going to make that one smaller. Oops. Cheating. So now I'm using my pointer tool so I can move things around. So I can also kind of organize things too. Stressful for high stakes. Good. We're going to talk about that today. We're going to talk about the Instructors not giving enough time for time quizzes. Exams, sounds like we have a theme here going on exams and cheating and high stakes tests. Hope I'm gonna make this one bigger. I can't read this. Fairness, that's interesting. Who posted that, please? I'd like to hear a little bit more about fairness. Who posted fairness? If you don't mind sharing. Dan, can you tell me a little bit about what you were thinking when you posted that one?
Yeah, it goes with the purple one that I put up as well, which is instructors thinking that what they had planned to do in a face-to-face setting will naturally translate in the same way to the online situation, and so keeping strict timelines, doing it at the time that they had previously announced, and not thinking about the really different reality that the students are working in, and how a 50-minute, students didn't sign up for what they're getting, how they're being taught right now. And a lot of students don't have the learning environment at home that is anywhere comparable to going into a lecture hall or a classroom, sitting down, okay, I'm ready, I'll take this test for 15 minutes, now I'm done. And with all the technical and personal constraints that they'll have, saying, okay, you got 50 minutes to do this, and that's what it said in the syllabus, and that's what you're going to do, to me raises really significant issues of fairness.
It's a very good point, and I was just checking that article that you posted, John, from Morton Grisbacher about the research done on this. Did you want to comment on that, John, real quickly? Because I just read it real quickly, but I think you know more about that.
We'll discuss that when we start going through the activity sheet.
All right, so we'll go through that, but that's very good. So thank you for sharing that. We will be talking about a lot of these items, including some maybe that aren't on this list. But we'll tailor this also to your needs. So if we go over these top 5 items, which I'm about to go through right now, we can decide which ones that you would like to talk a little bit more about, and also just open it up for questions. So high stakes exams is one of the things that you mentioned. And let's think about different ways that we can assign different types of assessments, qualitative assessments. And there's a great document linked at the bottom of this that lists a whole ton of them. But think about different ways that we could provide different assessments, such as projects and case studies and presentations, discussions, and reflective activities. And there's just so many different options to provide other than high stakes exams. So that was one of the issues you mentioned. Also, I didn't see this on there as much, but how about utilizing a variety of assessment to find out what your students' prior knowledge is before they do a content item in your course, maybe the first part of a module. We do that in Teach Online, where we ask people, what do you think about this topic, before they actually get into the topic. And that's talking about their prior knowledge, also known as diagnostic assessments. And this will help you decide, maybe how you want to lead that session, or questions you may want to address, or issues that you might encounter. So the diagnostic assessments and finding out what their prior knowledge is very helpful to help you guide what you're going to talk about in that unit. And then how about finding out what they're thinking about, what they're learning as they go? Those are also important assessments to find out and gauge their comprehensive and progress. We offer a variety of online classroom assessment strategies that you could use that are very low stakes and very easy to do, because I know that's a concern at this point. What can you do that is easy, that doesn't take a lot of time? And oftentimes these don't need any points or don't need any grade with them, so you're just finding out from the students what they're thinking, what they're knowing, and gauging their learning. Plus, it makes your course more interactive. It makes it more active learning when you're providing a lecture and then finding out, okay, what did you get out of this, or what were your thoughts about this, to get some more low stakes exams. And then a lot of you mentioned about creating secure and accessible quizzes, exams. So there's a lot of different ways that in Canvas quizzing that you can shuffle the questions, allow multiple attempts, give immediate feedback to their answers. There's a lot of tricks, and one of them is the timed ones. That we mentioned that to use that very carefully, because it's just adding more stress to our students to have any kind of time test, as you guys pointed out so well on the whiteboard just a few minutes ago. So instead, try some of these other techniques. You can even have one question show at a time on a quiz. You can eliminate the ability to go backwards in a quiz. So there's other things you can do other than having timing that will still make your quizzes and exams secure. And we'll talk about some of that as well. And this is one that I like to think about too. Some of you mentioned the cheating or the plagiarism and things like that. I guess I would like to add that let's assume that our students really don't intend to cheat or don't really know the rules of what it means. Did you provide clear expectations? Did you show them the academic and integrity policy? Did you explain your expectations? And are you asking them to do things that are impossible, like make sure you close your book before you take this exam, and they're taking it online. So don't provide things that are not possible or would encourage that type of behavior. Instead, explain what you expect and make it very clear, and also provide tools that help them understand what it means. For example, we have a quiz later on here that you can utilize, a quiz on what does it really mean for academic integrity. Maybe they just don't really know the rules, and that's a really big issue when people come from other countries too, because it's common to do some of the things that we consider potentially cheating, but they may just consider it collaborating or just getting their work done because they have to get it done. Students are under a lot of pressure at this point. So we have different tools to help with that, not only in quizzing, but there's another program called Turn It In where you can explain what that is later on if you're interested, to learn how to do proper source attribution and to help check papers and documents to see if it's to check them against other sources on the internet. And be clear and transparent. This is really important as well. And that gets really difficult when you're doing things online. Things have to be even more clear because you don't have a chance in the face-to-face classroom to explain the assignment or to explain it in better detail. So we recommend things like Rubrics, and we share quite a few here that you can use, very simple ones that you could use. And actually that can save you time. Rubric is a tool that you can use that actually provides list out what is expected exactly and how you're grading them, and it gives really good details on what a grade means, which is sometimes hard to tell. I remember when I was a student, I would get a grade and I have absolutely no idea why I got this grade compared to this one, but a rubric can help explain that a little bit better. And then involve them in it. How about trying peer reviews? Because it's difficult when you get a lot of papers. So maybe have another student or two students review another student's paper, and then when it comes back to you after they make the changes, it's in better shape. And this also helps students with their skills of describing, assessing, criticizing, and analyzing. So it helps the students also to see other students' papers because they learn from that experience as well. And then it will save you a great deal of time because some of the issues that you might have had to deal with have been handled already, and you can focus on higher level type feedback. So those are just a couple ideas. Obviously, we're happy to talk more about all of these, but we want to hear from you. So I'll let John explain how we're going to run the rest of this lab so we can find out what your questions are and make sure we address your needs, because maybe none of those were things you want to talk about, or maybe one of those is something more specific and you want more details. So I'm going to turn this over to John so we can tailor this program to your needs.
All right, so I'm going to draw your attention over to the activity sheet, and in the chat I've got a link to that. And Duncan, you're trying to multitask. Learning Science says that doesn't work. Duncan, can't be in two different Blackboard Collaborate sessions at the same time, not effectively. Okay, I know, you and your students can. That's excellent. All right, well, I'll have somebody else answer the audio and video control tabs on that. I don't know the answer to that. But for everyone else, and for Duncan, as much as you can, with the link in the link for the activity sheet in the chat, we have the activity sheet here, and you will notice that the activity sheet has the edit controls available for you at the very top. That means that you can go in and add your comments and thoughts to it. I'm going to disable mine right now, and here are the top 5 tips that Karen was just talking about with a little bit more information, including these other classroom assessment strategies that are available here for online use. And then down below, this is the more important part for right now, as far as this section of our lab goes. What is it that you want to learn? If you can add your thoughts here, any questions that you want to make sure that we address, grab a number and jump right into that.
Duncan has a question here on atomic assessments.
I'm going to move that right over here to number
Yeah.
3, or
Right,
number
Cliff,
1,
is that
and
something you
paste it
would
right
be?
in there.
Great. Cliff, would that be something you want to comment about since we have you on the line?
Yes, atomic assessment, and I'm sorry, just curious about it or where to go to get resources. Yes, it is a Learn at UW supported tool. If you want to reach out to me after offline, I can point you towards the person. Actually, I think the best bet is probably to go ahead and contact the help desk, and just request I want to get in contact for an atomic assessment consult, and then they will escalate it up the food chain to us. But atomic assessment, in short, is just a quizzing tool, a more robust quizzing tool than what Canvas offers. When we converted specifically from Moodle over into Canvas, there were some pretty clever advanced quizzing techniques that we lost moving to Canvas. So this atomic assessments was intended to be our what do you call it, gap filler. So just it is a bit more complex. There is a learning curve attached to it, but certainly it is an option, and we would love to show you what you can do.
And
the scores go to the gradebook, don't they, Cliff? They go directly, just like the quizzing tool, correct?
Correct. Yeah, feeds. There's a tight integration between atomic assessments and Canvas. So yeah, you build it within Canvas, which kind of has a shell of atomic assessment within it now, and yeah, and it feeds right into the gradebook.
I was looking for my notes because the Canvas quizzing tool has only 12 question types, if I remember correctly, and I can't find my note on this, but doesn't the atomic assessment have like 45 different assessment types? I have to look at can't find my note on that, but
it's a bunch.
It's a bunch. Yeah. It's a huge number. Yes, and it's very, very visual too. Yeah, there's a lot of different types that you wouldn't imagine, even drag and drop and a whole variety.
I do want to offer an additional comment on atomic assessments. In addition to the steeper learning curve than Canvas assessments has, or Canvas quizzes has, there's also a cost per pupil, not to the pupil, but that the university pays. So the more that you use it, the more it costs the university, which, as you now know, is losing $100 million in this COVID-19 area. So if you can use Canvas quizzes, consider doing so for your assessment needs.
Right, but as Duncan said here, it does have some things that the quizzing tool doesn't have for math and physics and some things, which is why I believe we got it, because because we did lose some robust tools that we needed.
I'm suggesting that if you're just doing basic multiple choice questions, there's no need to go into atomic assessments. Dan.
That's correct.
I'm just going to jump in with some first and second-hand experience of atomic assessments. That the learning curve is quite steep, and so I would not suggest anybody take it on with the expectation that they're going to figure it out kind of on the fly, in a few hours and be up and running with it. It's a steep learning curve. There's still some rough edges with it. If you know that there's a reason for using it, it does definitely do things that Canvas quizzes don't. But it's not something that we went into it thinking we'll use it because it is the new tool, and without a specific need for it, or with some need but not 100%, and have some regrets about making that decision. And that was with several months of planning and preparation to get it in place. So just sharing that anecdotally.
No, that's really important. Very important point. Thank you.
Duncan, go ahead. You're in the assessment strategies lab right now.
Dan, Dan, if you had some notes that you prepared and were willing to share, that could be really useful.
I don't have any specific notes, but the people that I work with that did the setup and would be able to talk to you about it are Jim Burling and Erica Hagan in SEAT in engineering, and both of them have got large grains of salt that they carry around that they could share with you when considering atomic assessments. But I could definitely
Yeah,
put you in touch
can
with them.
can you drop those names in the chat, Erica and somebody else?
We'll put those in the activity sheet, okay? All right, and if somebody could just jump in and add some answers to these, that would be awesome. As they come up on the activity sheet, we'll have some of our moderators jump in with what they can do. And as they add these answers, I'd like you to everybody just sort of keep in mind that these are not the end-all be-all answers, but they're sort of quick responses as much as we can respond to them.
I like that number 9 there. I'm very concerned about the presumption of guilt prior to an exam. Why is the focus on cheating rather than the exam design as a starting point? That's very good. That's why I made that point that we have to presume that students don't mean to cheat. Why is there such a big concern on that? And I guess this is the number one thing that I always hear about when instructors are moving to online. Well, they're going to cheat. It's easier to cheat. So I do provide research in our course that really that isn't a big change, but the key is how do you design your quizzes in a way that it is easy to cheat? If it's an answer that they can look up so easy and so quickly, well, you can do that in the real world as well. So how can you design better exam design? So that I'm happy to hear anybody else's thoughts on that, but I'm wondering if it's because how difficult it is to create a really good exam design. I'm happy to open that one up for feedback.
Well, and I'm going to jump in and suggest that this is to Dan Pell's point early on in the discussion today. These students did not sign up for an online course. They signed up for a face-to-face course. And in a face-to-face course, as an instructor, you have a lot more control over the classroom testing environment. You know that they will be there from hour X to hour Y, and they have Wi-Fi that is robust enough in the classroom to be able to use whatever you throw at them, mostly. And they have seats, and they've got good lighting, and they've got pens, and all of these things that you have a lot of control in the face-to-face environment. In an online environment, as an instructor, you have no idea how they are answering, how they are taking their tests. You don't know if they have to share a computer with a younger brother or sister who needs to use it for their K-12 testing or learning right now, and so maybe they don't have it. You don't know what their internet access is like. They might be taking it on their mobile phone instead of on a computer. These are all questions that you don't know. So I'm asking sort of forcefully, why would you stress them out by saying, oh, you have 30 minutes to take this crazy difficult exam that's reasonable in a classroom controlled environment, but maybe not when you're trying to take it on a phone here. Margine, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, I haven't spoken much today. I was kind of building on JT's comment in number 10, and I'm trying to think about ways to reframe the concept of cheating and design things where it is framed as relearning. So let me give you an example of what I'm thinking about. An open book exam. To me, if we have hard questions and fair questions and really align with the learning objectives, I don't see the reason not to have an open book exam. When we ask students to do research papers, or in graduate school when we are compiling literature reviews and what have you, that is the process of thinking deeply about the information that we are learning, thinking and learning how to reuse our resources, right? Because oftentimes our students are going to leave these classes, and yes, they may have passed the exam, but did they really learn how to relearn the material, or make that material stick. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. And I think that's a big issue, is how are they going to really use this in the real world? If they're going to be able to look it up and use that material anyways, why not teach them the proper way to do it? So learning how to use it, how to find materials. But I guess where it comes in a lot is there's some courses that they do need to have that remote knowledge of being able to remember something. And in that case, I know there is a lot of concerns, especially in math or in some of the other, like pharmacy and things like that, where sometimes they have to be able to remember. Even a psychology course, I know they had to remember some terminology. So that's where some of these issues come in. Yeah, Jeffrey?
Yeah, I completely agree with that, but I would say, I mean, I think we're talking about perhaps two separate things, sort of a final exam being remote versus sort of a weekly quiz that does those knowledge checks and makes sure students have those facts and equations, et cetera, memorized. I don't know, I just really see Marjean's point, sort of the end of the semester being a demonstration of all of that information coming together versus, sort of a discrete assessment. And that's just sort of where I don't want to say getting lost, but that's where I'm thinking.
And I'm just going to push back a little bit on the memorization thing, because I do think there are things where students need to have a network of knowledge, right? And that it needs to be, they need to have some automaticity in recall. But we also know that there's a forgetting curve too, especially if they're not using that information. Just thinking of myself, I'm constantly having to go back and reference and find the right terminology for learning sciences or educational philosophical movements and things like that, even though somewhere deep inside I know them, So this is where I'm arguing for rethinking about even final exams as opportunities to really dig deeply into the resources and work on finding the right answer. I think that in and of itself will make the learning more durable. That's my opinion.
Oh, no, I agree with you. I'm just talking about other faculty who have that concern about where they need to know those factual pieces of information that are easy to lose up. So I totally agree with you, Marjean. But so how do you deal, which group of faculty do you tend to work with? Do you work with faculty who have this concern a lot, or not in your area?
Absolutely. Classes I'm embedded in right now are pre-health, so our anatomy and physiology courses and our early statistics courses. And so those are the same kind of conversations that we're having too. That is it necessary to be able to sit down in a stats course and know off the top of your head that formula? Because later on you can just go look up the formula. If you know it exists, you're trying to kind of get to it. You know what I'm saying?
How are those conversations going?
They're going very well, but I have a lot of time to work with my people and really have really deep conversations with them. So this may not be the same place, but that's just something I've been thinking about, maybe in the long term, how we message that, reframing that idea of what cheating looks like.
Oh, that's good.
All right,
what other
and
questions?
we've got people putting answers into the questions after the questions that have been asked in the activity sheet here. Okay, let's go to number 4 here because, it's a MASH reference. Oh, MASH, the TV show. Back in the 70s, there was a TV show about a military hospital. So triage, what are the best practices when we're in triage mode and we have to, okay, way to go, Lauren. Yeah, so here's the thing about emergencies. Oftentimes we are not as prepared for them as we might be, because when we're not having an emergency, we're busy doing other things that we think are nice to do and not thinking about those things. So Are there best practices for triage? Does anyone have any thoughts on that?
I really think grounding whatever that triage in the learning objectives and potentially having to cut or shift some learning objectives is one way to triage. Like, what is the least intrusive way I can help my students meet these learning objectives?
Yeah, go back to the learning. In some ways, and I'm going to point out to the top of the how-to is reconsider your strategies given the online landscape. So we're moving from that controlled environment again that I was just pontificating about just a moment ago. And it's stressful. It's stressful for you as the instructor because you've designed things for a face-to-face environment teaching, right? And it's stressful for the students because now all of a sudden they're at home. The person that they've always studied with who used to sit next to them in classroom is, thousands of miles away perhaps. Their whole social connections are disrupted and moving online, and their teaching is now online and their learning is online. They might have terrible internet. They might not have any internet. We hear stories about people up north in Wisconsin and other rural areas who go to their libraries, park in the library parking lot, and use that Wi-Fi to do their learning. Is your course set up for that? Probably not, because it's not a thing that many of us, I've got pretty good internet service right here, so I don't think about having to do that. If I focus on myself and the expectations that I would need to complete assignments, I'm not going to be doing a service to a lot of my students who have much different needs and much different circumstances. Yesterday in our Lecturing Alternatives lab, I forgot who it was. It was Heidi Evans, talked about how she asks her students over and over again, what are your circumstances? What do you need? How can I help you? She has a lot of international students from China, right? So she had initially sent out a Google form. Well, China and Google, they don't play well very nicely together. So that didn't work. She sent the same questions out in an email. She got a much higher response. You have to think about that. And it's not just what you can think of, it's also what you can get from as far as feedback from your students. So ask your students, ask them in multiple ways. And this is, again, universal design for learning, multiple means of engagement, multiple means of representation. Some might be able to do video, some might only be able to do audio, some might only be able to do text. Can you give them different options? Focused on your basic objectives for the day or for the lesson, for the course. Going back to your initial, what do you want to achieve as far as learning goes? And that's to Marjean's point about going back to the basics. I think I saw somebody raise their hand and lower it. Maybe not. Lindy asks the questions, or Lindy, talk more about the push for a specific timed window. What does that mean?
Yeah, so we in Chem 104, we're heading into exam 3. We've got a few weeks, and so we want the next 2 quizzes to be to have the elements of what the exam will look like. So the first quiz for next week will be a Canvas quiz. So that would be the auto-graded piece. The quiz for the following week would be a handwritten assessment that students take a picture of, and upload. What where we are struggling to figure out is offering students a timed window and what that window should be like. And I worry about the students on the margins who don't have reliable access, who could have issues. And but there are a lot of instructors who feel like we have to time it, otherwise it is not rigorous enough. And so that's what I'm struggling with. So I'd like to, if there's some literature or some best practices about large enrollment STEM courses done remotely. I don't know if Arizona State, since have a lot of online courses if they've, kind of waded into this, but that's where we're at.
Yeah, and if you can't make that argument to the instructors about the built-in disparity and inequity of doing this in an online space with students that you don't know the circumstances of, I don't know how to, there cannot be best practices on a bad practice. What's the least best practice, or what's the least worst of the best? What's the least worst practice, maybe, is rather than what any best practices for timed tests in this situation. Does anyone else have thoughts on this? Duncan has some thoughts.
Let's see about timing. Yeah, I wrote a little note in the chat, if you can hear me. I do think this is a somewhat problematic thing. In the face-to-face environment, we have a time band, the time window, and students use that, and we have constraints. In the online environment, of course, you could allow an infinite amount of time to do assessments. I don't know what the right answer is. I think any human gets tired after, well, name a time, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours taking an exam. I think your brain just gets fried. So I don't think it's really fair to students to assign a very long time, because the ones who, everyone will feel like they should use all that time. So I think one needs to be wary about the scope of exams and assessments, and do something sensible here, such that most students can complete the exam in the required amount of time.
Yeah. Dan, what are your thoughts?
To say about it. Yeah.
Go ahead, Dan.
Hi, everybody. Sorry, Sandrine and I are here, and so we were talking, and I kind of forgot why I had my hand up. So, I was going to say something about timing for exams. Is that my experience over as this batch lead with different departments right now is that every time that this comes up, I'm finding instructors really thoughtful and responsive to it, but it keeps coming up again and again, and I feel like part of the solution to it is that it's a problem people aren't totally aware of and haven't thought of in transitioning. And the more the sooner and the broader that the sooner we can get the message out to people and broadly that this is something to think about, and here are the reasons why you need to think about expending the time and removing the timing constraints or giving longer time and being more flexible, the more this practice will be picked up and shared by people. I think people are really open to it. They just haven't necessarily thought about it before.
So this is a good reason to share things like the 4 empirically based reasons to not do timed tests. But even with that research, we've always done it this way. This is what we need to do. It's really hard to get people to change that momentum. And in some ways, we're in a situation now where if they don't do it now, they never will.
So, John, if I could comment,
Yeah.
I've tried the sort of competence, very topical assessments, and just go
Yep.
with that. What I do, it's sort of oddly, I mean, we have all these great ideas, but then when you ask students about it, well, they have different ideas. And what I find is that students expect and value midterm exams. They actually do. And I think it's about optimization. They aren't constantly reviewing material, and it's kind of this. Yeah, they cram for exams. That's very efficient from their point of view.
But it's not efficient as far as learning is concerned.
I understand that. I understand that. But we're dealing with these are our customers. They're used to it. They expect. So I mean, you have to be careful what you do. unless everybody's doing it, becomes a norm, then particularly in the an introductory course, one could trip up trying to improve learning and end up having students feel like they've been abused in some way. So I would urge some caution. That said, I once did teach a class where I just eliminated the exams and did incremental things, and it was a slightly intermediate level class, and that was much appreciated. But the first year students coming in, they hate and love having exams.
Yeah, no, there is something masochistic about staying up all night and cramming for the exam and then sort of saying, oh, I stayed up till 5 a.m. See how tough I am. But, ask them next week what they learned, and they're like, I don't know, I was in a zombie state.
And then they tend to forget it all the next day. I always share this humorous video of, I don't know if that will really date me, but Guido Sarducci from Saturday Night Live with the 5-minute university. And I always use that in Teach Online, because how much do we remember after cramming for that exam? Back to Marjean's point about the learning retention and being able to use materials. How much do you actually remember after you cram for an exam and then everything's done and then you move on? How much do you really remember from that? So how can you apply your knowledge if possible?
So one of the
So I'd
engineering
like
instructors, go ahead.
Well, I have mixed feelings about that. I feel like in my discipline, which is physics, you learn 2 steps forward, 1 step back. So you see it, and yeah, you forget it, but you know where the resource is, or you have the ideas and kind of the structure set up in your head. And then if you see it again at an intermediate level, it solidifies and an advanced level. And then if you're a graduate student, maybe you learn it. And finally, if you teach it as a faculty, you might learn the simple stuff. So
No,
I
I'm going
don't
to jump in
expect
right
them
there.
to have to learn it perfectly and remember every single thing. I think that's just not humanly possible for material that's dense, and there's a lot, and we're trying to move a lot of information. So.
But you just said it, Duncan. Graduate students might learn it, but it's not until you actually teach it to undergraduates that you actually start to learn it, know it. And what if we had undergraduates teach to each other, and figure out, what do I need to ask? What are the questions? How can I present it? Having students present and teach other students how to do that, those students become experts, lowercase e, experts, in that, because they are thinking about, well, how do I understand this? How do I make other people understand it? And that's a different set of thinking tools than, how do I remember how do I remember this thing? What do I have to do to memorize it and spit it back out on a test? All right.
It depends on what kind of course you're teaching and whether it's a discipline that builds or it's sort of a terminal course.
Yeah, and there's also the point about, we don't want our students to teach other students badly.
There is that. I'm not saying that peer teaching is all bad or anything. I'm just making the point that I don't. The students appreciate the review time. I don't expect them to remember everything, be able to take a final comprehensive exam, for example. So I don't force them to review the entire semester. I just have bins of 3 bins. But my goal is, to have them review to the point where they can demonstrate competence at what time. They're going to forget it. Information has a half-life. Only part of it leaked. And, that's psychology, right? So, but it also is a matter of integrating lots of experience that you can't to really create competence in something at expert level. And I certainly do not expect my students to become experts in any of this stuff. I only want them to appreciate what's out there and learn what's possible to learn.
And that's less of a Bloom's cognitive taxonomy and more in the area of Bloom's affective taxonomy, where they start not just listening, not just responding, but start to value and see the world the way that a physicist might see it. And I think that that's true for a lot of our undergraduate lower level courses. It's just, well, I don't know what this field actually is or why it's important. So they take your 100 level, 200 level class to sort of get more of an understanding of why it's important. And it's not until they declare the major that they're like, okay, I think this is really important enough that I'm going to focus on it. Now you've got them. At that point, it's sort of, you can step back and let them take the lead, but you're right, at the
Yeah,
beginning
it's
few
on the
courses.
level. Yeah, and the goals of the class and the level.
And so that, in some ways, that's should be reflected in the exams, I think. Now, I also understand that a lot of the STEM courses, things like chemistry and others, they do need to learn how to do the calculations. They need to figure out, they need to have some rote knowledge that they will need to apply on those later exams. And they might not fully understand why they're doing it yet, but they still need to have those. That gets tricky. All right, there's a chat happening on the side. Somebody want to jump in and catch me up on what's happening with that? Nargene and JT, Lauren?
Just thinking about, I guess if I summarized it, spreading out assessment, so it's maybe not one big old high stakes summative assessment, but multiple formative assessments that allow students to show competency in different ways. Reducing, not that the summative assessment doesn't have to happen, like you said, we do need to know there is a level of rote knowledge that needs to happen, but that it doesn't have the high stakes, as high of stakes associated with it. I think that also reduces the pressure to cheat.
Yeah, it does.
Or the concept of whatever cheating.
Yeah, and that's the those questions or those, one of the things that I love, and I'm going to highlight those about the essays and projects, case studies, etc., and reflective activities, is those are more often about applying what you know to as you see it, explaining it as you see it, and so it encourages you to think about, well, how would I apply this as a person with my own interests and goals and such, and how can I pull other elements of my life in to make this specific and personal to me? And that's different from like a basic facts-based multiple choice, for example, test that can be high stakes. Lauren, you had your hand up. Go ahead, Lauren.
I actually took it down because what I was going to say was said, so it's all good.
All right. Okay. I've lost track of where we are in this. I see some questions that are mostly answered. Oh, somebody just highlighted this one. Dan, is this one we should talk about? Go ahead, Dan.
Hit the wrong button. You know, this was actually Sandrine's question, but she had to go to another meeting. We're sharing one computer because the kids are on the other screen right now.
Yeah.
Let me see
Are
if
you
I can
taking a test
and bring her
taking...
back. I just heard her go up the stairs. So if you want to move on to something, I'll chase her.
All right, we'll come back to that.
Number 6 is interesting, John, if you want to point out that one.
Number 6, go ahead.
She is here.
Oh, all right, back to number, what was that, 4? 5.
Hey,
okay.
Hey. Yeah, sorry, I was setting up for another meeting, but yeah, I appreciate the answer. So I was wondering about alternative forms of assessment. And one of the reasons is that one of my students who is going through a lot right now took the lead and asked if she could, instead of the portfolio that I asked them to turn in at the end of the semester, if she could make it more creative, like she hasn't given a lot of details, but more something more create, an artifact that she would create. And I think from listening to the discussion that was going on, it makes it in many ways it's much more meaningful because she's not gonna. It's something that will have meaning to her and will take the shape that she feels comfortable it does. So just yeah.
So, and one of the things about these alternative assessments is they can be, like, if you're not careful, you can say, all right, give me something that's good, and they will come up with 30 things and you have to then figure out 30 ways to grade 30 different things fairly, or you can create one rubric that's broad enough that says, give me 3 examples. I don't care if it's video examples or audio examples or a written paper or whatever. Cite certain number of sources. You can do that, video, audio, whatever. Build in some flexibility within that rubric, and then let them go. And it's up to them to show, I did this, and I did the 3 examples as a cliche in the modern dance moves, or whatever. But it's up to them to meet the rubric rather than for you to come up with a new rubric to meet whatever they're doing.
Yeah, yeah. No, that makes sense to have a broader, yeah, criteria. Yeah.
Criteria.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
And then Karen Skibba, you want to talk about number 6, right?
Well, somebody brought that up and I thought it was interesting. Who wrote this one? Is there a difference in quality design of an exam you would offer face-to-face versus online, responding to concerns of transferring from face-to-face to online? Jeff, was that you, Jeffrey, who wrote that one?
Yeah, I was just thinking, maybe in my own head, but the only difference between the two is just the way that the exam is submitted. So what really is the design difference between an exam that you write for remote versus...
I have thoughts. So I think that in a face-to-face exam, like a blue book handwritten exam, you don't have time to go find better sources. You don't have time to think deeply about how to integrate this. In an online exam, you have as much time as you need to, ideally you have as much time as you need to make the case that you want to make in it. Now, if it's just a multiple choice exam and there's no video, no audio, no text, and you just have to wait for the Canvas page to load or not load, that's a low bandwidth thing. Provided it all goes through and it doesn't kick you out if your internet drops out or your router needs to be reset. Maybe there is no big difference between those two. But ideally, we've got these computers and these phones and the internet connections and our neighbors that we're talking to across the fence 6 feet or 12 feet apart from each other. All of that life can play into an online exam that doesn't exist in a classroom environment. So why would we give that same sort of artificial exam that we have to give in this artificial classroom environment to a life situation? Dan, you've got thoughts?
I'm wondering if anyone has had recent experience adding more qualitative questions to a more factual focused or problem solving type exam. So adding in questions like, why do you think this? Or how can you relate this to other things you're learning? Or where can you see this in the real world? So adding in both for integrity and also for trying to get higher level thinking in the test, to say not just can you remember this information, but tell me about the process, tell me about the reasons, tell me about the application of it, and adding in written questions that way. And that's definitely one way to make sure that people aren't just sharing information or finding the answer somewhere online if they also have to explain it. But has anybody had any success with that?
Yes.
Yeah, it is a good idea. And I know there's a lot of concerns of faculty if they have a lot of students, which is why they tend to go with the multiple choice and things like that, because the grading issues. But with SpeedGrader, it does help actually with a lot of that, because you can look at one question at a time. There's a lot of ways that you can utilize the SpeedGrader to help minimize how much time it takes to grade open-ended questions. But I know that is a concern, because if I brought that up a lot to faculty as well, and their number one concern is, I have 500 students in my course. How can I respond to that many open-ended questions? So that is a concern. SpeedGrader can help with some of that, but it does increase some of the workload And that's, I know that is a concern of people.
Well, and that's another area where alternative assessments and those classroom assessment techniques can play a bigger part for those more qualitative opportunities as well. JT, you had your hand up for a moment. Did you still have something to say?
Yeah, I was going to say the response that you gave about the affordances of the online environment. It to me it sort of seems a false comparison, right? Because you've assumed that none of that would happen in a face-to-face environment, and so then so I think all of that gets back to the question of exam design from the get-go, whether it's face-to-face versus online. I mean, it seems to be having the same conversation.
So, well, the face-to-face one is by definition a timed thing, right? Because you have an hour that you're meeting face-to-face. You may have computers where you can go in and add some other things. I'm thinking of, I've forgotten what they're called, the qualifying, the prelims exams as a PhD student. I had the choice of, do I want to do like write as much as I can in 3 days, or do I want to take, I think 14 days, or maybe it was 21 days, and write as much as I need, sort of but it would be the expectations for the 21-day exam were much higher than the expectations of the spew it all out in 3 days exam. I think that those two, they need to be different. The expectations are different in that. Just as being able to sit down and spend a night and think about, well, how would I answer this question is different. I can't do that in a 1 hour face-to-face classroom exam. So the pressure is on for me to write down in that blue book as fast as I can, versus I can stop and think about this, take a dog for the walk, roll it over in my mind. At least this is how it works for me in my real life, in my work life. I have time to think about things before I'm forced to put down my final best answer. It's not a game show. It's not a timed exam.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, I don't disagree with that, but I would say that, again, it gets back to the question of exam design. As the instructor, you could choose to release the exam questions a week in advance.
You could, and you should. I think you should. That would especially help the folks of us who have